week or so ago, I wrote a piece about white rage, specifically rural white rage, being a problem, shall we say. It's the foundation of the Trump vote and all that kind of thing. And in my piece, I was kind of basing it on the book Rural White Rage, but not really. I included a long list, maybe, geez, I don't know, 15, 20 things, where red states are just, rural red states are in deep trouble compared to more urban blue states. Things like sexually transmitted diseases, teenage pregnancy, maternal mortality, drug addiction, high school and college dropping out, malnutrition, hookworm disease, and other parasites, type 2 diabetes, cancer, just the list, smoking, the list just went on and on and on. I felt that the book Rural White Rage was pretty solid, but one of the people whose research was cited in the book, in their own book, which was far more milquetoast, or from their own book, which was far more milquetoast, they wrote an op-ed for The Atlantic just going after the people who wrote this book, Rural White Rage. And similarly, a reporter in Politico wrote a kind of a hit piece on it. And when I published my piece, I got several phone calls from people on this program saying, hey, have you read this piece in The Atlantic or this piece in Politico? And are you sure you want to stand behind saying that, rural white rage is a thing and that it's out of control in rural areas and all that kind of thing? Are you sure you want to say it? And I was like, yeah, I stand behind this. In particular, I stand behind my article. I mean, the guys who wrote the book can defend themselves, but my article was absolutely solid. There's not a single thing in there that I can't back up. And in fact, they're all hot linked. Every single one of my assertions has a hot link to an article that substantiates my claim. So now Paul Waldman and Tom Schaller, they're the authors of White Rural Rage. The new threat to American democracy is, the subtitle is something like that. They just published a piece in the New Republic talking back to both Politico and The Atlantic. They're the authors of those two pieces. And what they're pointing out, well, this is interesting. This is just the first paragraph. Something remarkable happened among rural whites between the 2016 and 2020 elections. According to the Pew Research Center's validated voters study, as the rest of the country moved away from Donald Trump, rural whites lurched toward him by 9 points, from 62 to 71% support. And among the 100 counties where Trump performed best in 2016, almost all of them small and rural, he got a higher percentage of the vote in 91 of them in 2020. When we wrote White Rural Rage, we knew that our provocative argument and book title would arouse ire on the right. We were not disappointed. And then they cite this article in Politico by Nicholas Jacobs and another in The Atlantic by Tyler Harper, who they note is, quote, an environmental studies professor who has made it a personal crusade to attack us in our book. They write, these pieces illustrate some of the very pathologies so common in the way scholars and pundits treat rural whites. And this is interesting. They go on to say, in recent years, research from political scientists showing some disturbing patterns of opinion among rural voters, especially rural whites, has begun to accumulate, but there is clear discomfort with the implications of this research, even among some of the researchers themselves. And they go on to say, we call this phenomenon the shouts and whispers approach to social science discourse about rural whites. If you find no difference between the political attitudes of rural whites and other Americans, you shout it from the rooftops. If you uncover transgressive political beliefs among rural whites, you whisper it in a conference panel with a dozen people in attendance and no media to be found. And they go on to say, no wonder what would happen if rural politics scholars took to the online pages of pieces like Politico and The Atlantic to describe their more troubling findings. Excuse me, we wonder what would happen. Actually, we don't have to wonder. Their inboxes would be filled with the hateful and threatening emails that we are receiving. They note, when it comes to rural resentments, again and again, these scholars insist that if rural whites were mad, it's only because they have good reason to be. And then they point out that they agree with that, and they pointed it out in their own damn article, or in their own damn book, that the hospitals are being closed, ambitious young people are leaving, pharmacies are shutting down, et cetera. They say what isn't said enough is that rural whites are being told to blame all the wrong people for their very real problems. As we argue in the book, Hollywood liberals didn't destroy the family farm. College professors didn't move manufacturing jobs overseas. Immigrants didn't pour opioids into rural communities. And critical race theory didn't close hundreds of rural hospitals. When Republican politicians and conservative media tell rural whites to aim their anger at these targets, it's so they won't ask why the people they keep electing haven't done anything to improve life in their communities. They note that, one of the two authors, the author of the Atlantic piece, Mr. Harper, Harper delivered a torrent of abuse at us on social media, calling us idiots and intellectual lightweights who wrote a dumb screed. He also called us soft-handed elites and claimed that our book says that rural white people are evil scum, which, of course, it does not. And they go on to say, more importantly, our critics refuse to seriously grapple with rural whites' place in Trump's movement as it grows increasingly authoritarian. I just want to encourage you to read this piece. It goes on from there, and I'm not going to quote more of it to you, but it's over at newrepublic.com, and it's titled, An Honest Assessment of Rural White Resentment is Long Overdue. And spot on. I completely agree. And the second story I wanted to share with you, and then I'll pick up your calls, is just an absolutely fascinating one. Here in the United States, increasingly because of Russian trolls running propaganda campaigns on TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media sites, but those are the principal three. More and more, increasingly, you've got young people who are kind of following the Marjorie Taylor Greene argument that we should just abandon Ukraine. We've got enough on our plate. We've got enough problems here at home. Why are we helping another country? Screw them. Let Putin have them. He's already kidnapped 100,000 children and sold them into sex slavery in Russia. Let him kidnap, 1 million Ukrainian children. What's the big deal? It's just Ukrainian children after all. He's already murdered a couple 100,000 Ukrainians. Let him murder 1 million of them. So, what's the big deal? They're just Ukrainians. I mean, this is Marjorie Taylor Greene's and up until now Mike Johnson's, and certainly, Paul Gosar and all these other asses, these idiots, in the so-called Freedom Caucus, the cokehead caucus, the far right, the nut jobs. So here in the United States, our young people are getting more and more skeptical about aid to Ukraine because that Russian propaganda is taking hold and because it has been embraced by Donald Trump and by his followers in the Republican Party. Not so in France. In France, Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, has been making sure that French people know exactly what's going on in Ukraine. Because the French had this experience in 1940, I think it was, maybe 39. I'm not sure when Germany invaded France. I believe it was 1940. Of having, a fascist country just roll in and take over, and having a significant portion of their population, the so-called Vichy French, go along with it. I mean, the Germans didn't just come in and take over France. They set up a puppet government in France of French people. And that, French government was every bit as fascist as any other. I mean, watch this movie on HBO, The Plot to Overthrow America. It's just incredible. So anyhow, here's this story. This is from a Ukrainian newspaper, actually. Over half of young French citizens would fight in Ukraine to defend France, according to a poll cited by Le Parisien a French newspaper on April 12th. The Institute for Strategic Studies of the Military School and the General Directorate for International Relations and Strategy surveyed 2,300 young people aged 18 to 25 last summer. They asked the question, if the protection of France required the country to engage in the war in Ukraine, would you be ready to defend your country? Of the respondents, 51% said yes, including 17% absolutely agreeing and 34% answering yes, maybe yes. Young French citizens also favor deploying French troops to Ukraine more than the older generation. In the survey, 31% of youth thought positively about deploying French troops on the side of Ukraine, while only 17% of those over 50 agreed. 1 in 2 young people between 18 and 25 says they are ready to commit to France in Ukraine. It's pretty remarkable. So what's going on is that the young people in Ukraine, well, I would say, more or less right across the board, the people, in France, the people of France understand that if Putin takes Ukraine, he's coming after Poland next. And if he takes Poland, then it's going to be, or Moldova next, or both. And after he takes Moldova and Transnistria and Poland, I mean, he's already got Transnistria. After he takes those, he's going to go for Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia, the Baltic states. And then he's going to come for France. I mean, they've seen this movie before. Now, here in the United States, we've never been invaded by fascists. I mean, the closest we got to that was Pearl Harbor being bombed by the fascist Japanese. So there's this kind of general amnesia here in the United States. But in France, not so much. I find this absolutely fascinating. I haven't seen studies out of any other European countries, but it wouldn't surprise me if they're not that different. All righty, what's on your mind? I'll pick up your calls on the other side of this break. Stay with us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
There's a break in the jury selection, by the way. Basically, no news coming out of the courthouse this morning. But I will keep you up to date as we go on, blow by blow.